The affirmative team from Melbourne Boys High School is first speaker Luke Nail, second speaker Matt Nielsen, third speaker Eric Alimogu, and team advisor Adam Wall. The negative team from North Sydney Boys is first speaker Justin McMahon, second speaker Davinda Jagwa, third speaker Kumar Rajia, and team advisor Shahir Bogdan. The communicator for this debate is Tony David. Each speaker may speak for 7 minutes. There will be a warning bell at 5 minutes with 2 bells at 8 minutes to indicate that the speaker's time has expired. A bell will be run continuously if the speaker exceeds the maximum time by more than 1 minute. The topic for today's debate is that character attacks are a legitimate political tactic. Before the debate commences, I will kindly ask that as a courtesy to the speakers, all mobile phones be switched off. I now call the first affirmative speaker, Luke Nair, to begin the debate.
Having the civil team here, I'm glad we can get this underway. The debate today, as we all know, is that character attacks are a legitimate political tactic, and we on the affirmative team support this idea. Now, we live in Australia in a Western liberal democracy, and they say that the 3 most important points of this democracy is having a parliament to legislate, a judiciary to enforce this legislation and decide what it means, and also a free media. Now, today's debate is inevitably going to center around this idea of the free media, which I'll get back to in a second. Today on the affirmative team, we contend that character critiques, debates, and attacks are an essential part of a functioning liberal Western democracy. Now, by character critiques, we mean debates and attacks on the personal life, the personality, the biases, the beliefs, the prejudices, and so on of a political figure. And we argue that these are valid and essential to a liberal Western democracy. Now, before I give my arguments, I'll talk briefly about the role of the free media. The free media in a Western democracy is designed to keep the audiences informed and entertained, but also to ensure the accountability of government and to ensure that free speech is upheld. And this is where my 2 arguments will come from. I will be arguing about accountability and about free speech. My first argument, to do with accountability, is that in a functioning liberal democracy, accountability is a core value, and that character attacks support accountability. Now, what accountability means is keeping politicians susceptible to the consequences of their positions. And this is to encourage the best governance, because the more that politicians have to react to their positions, the better they're going to govern. Now, this generally has 2 elements. One, that they are faced with negative consequences for unpopular or bad positions, and 2, that the public knows of their positions. And that's what this really centers around, the public knowing about their positions. Character critiques and attacks help keep governments accountable through this second point, through keeping the public informed. Now, to illustrate this, I'll give an example. The example of Mark Latham, later leader running for PM. Mark Latham was going through a slow mental decline, faced with things like depression, uncertainty, and instability. It eventually culminated in things like him punching a cabbie and him subverting and undermining his own Labour Party. Now, he was publicly lambasted for this. And we think this is a good thing, because it's things like character critiques and attacks that came from the Liberals at Mark Latham that keep these politicians accountable and make sure that they're doing the best job. Because when you're getting attacked by a fierce opposition with character attacks about Mark Latham's personality and about his instability, Mark Latham became immediately unpopular because the public knew about his instability, and it meant that in the long term he didn't end up getting PM, and we didn't have a Prime Minister who was going to be unstable and lead to a worse Australia. So this illustrates really how accountability is a core value in our democracy, and how character attacks such as the ones against Mark Latham, are essential to upholding accountability. Everything that there is to know should be able to be known about a politician. That's what we're saying character attacks enforce on this aspect of accountability. Now, my second argument revolves around the role of free speech in a Western liberal democracy. This is one of the other values that's supported by the media, when people use the media as a platform to voice their views. Now, we set a precedent in this liberal democracy where anyone has the right to speak their mind. This is because we feel that people should be open to a range of opinions and views, and that it's certainly not the place of the government or any higher power to dictate which views are valid and which views are invalid. That is basically the value of free speech that we uphold in Australia currently. Now, admittedly, a lot of what is said in the public arena is going to be crap. But for the most part, people can sift through this, and they do. There's a lot of stuff said, and people take it upon themselves to decide what they listen to. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that if you decide that character attacks are not a legitimate part of a liberal democracy, then you're hindering free speech. Some of what is said is true, and it needs to be said, which is why in this democracy we are committed to free speech. And if you say that character attacks are not a legitimate part of a Western democracy, then you undermine the value of free speech. For example, we have the situation in the US of Bill Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Now, I don't need to explain this to you because it's gruesome and inappropriate, but we have an example here where people who are opposed to Bill Clinton used this right of free speech to question Clinton's focus and commitment to running the government after what happened. Now, this launched a public debate, which eventually got Bill Clinton tried for impeachment. Now, regardless of what you think of this, it's important that free speech keeps these public debates coming out. And that's why we hold that character attacks are valid in a political spectrum, because if you don't allow character attacks, you are undermining free speech. It's good that free speech does these things. So essentially, what we're going to see on the negative team tonight is that they're going to be arguing for censorship. They're going to argue against free speech. And they're going to do this because they're offended by quasi-offensive moral terms that may come out in a public debate. But what they're going to do is they're going to undermine these values of accountability, the accountability that keeps our system running well, that keeps the government doing the best it can because it's accountable to its actions, and they're going to undermine the free speech that comes out in the media in a liberal democracy. Thank you for your time.
The first negative speaker, Justin McMahon, will begin their case. Ladies and gentlemen, isn't it absolutely hilarious when a first affirmative speaker gets up and says he knows exactly what a debate's going to be about, when in fact she has no idea at all? Ladies and gentlemen, today's debate is not about whether we have the right to free speech. Ladies and gentlemen, today's debate is about whether political attacks and character attacks against politicians are legitimate, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why on the negative team today, we've set out a criteria of what is legitimacy. We've said that it falls under three areas. A, it has to be allowed. B, it has to be effective. And C, it has to be justified, ladies and gentlemen. And all we've gotten from the affirmative team's first speaker today is that we have the right to free speech. All he said is that we're allowed to say and do whatever we want. And ladies and gentlemen, in fact, in the two areas that he talked about in today's debate, that's all he really focused on. He looked at the accountability of politicians, and he looked at our right to free speech. And when he looked at the accountability of politicians, he said, look, it works brilliantly. We get to find something that may potentially, possibly, kind of be wrong with someone, and then we get to take them to court and tell the media that they've done everything wrong and essentially destroy the person. And ladies and gentlemen, he looked at Mark Latham as an example. And what we really saw with Mark Latham was allegations that maybe he possibly did punch a cab driver, and as a result, he was essentially destroyed. And on the negative team, we want to bring up another example.
example, namely John Brogdon, state politician, accused of possibly sexually harassing someone, and it was those allegations that he might have done something that almost caused him to commit suicide, ladies and gentlemen. It